Yo, what's up guys? Today I want to take a few minutes to talk about some questions that I had myself before purchasing the Panigale V2. Hopefully I can answer some of your questions, and if I can't, then go ahead and drop them in the comment section. I'll make sure to get to them. So the things that we're going to talk about today is how long can you expect to wait for a new order on a Ducati Panigale V2? Is it worth the money? Is it too powerful? Just how comfortable is it? Does it actually run as hot as people say it does? Does the stock exhaust sound good? And does it attract any unhealthy attention? So those were some things that I wondered myself before actually purchasing this bike. Now that I've had it for 200 miles in a couple weeks, I'd figured I'd take the time to answer some of your questions about it. Starting with the first question of how long can you expect to wait for one of these bad boys? I luckily only had to wait a week for it. So I called my local dealership. I said, I want to put in an order. They took my debit card information, and about 20 minutes later, I got a VIN. And luckily enough, I had one already on the way, or they had one on the way from Italy for display purposes already. So I only had to wait about a week, but otherwise it's anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks to get one of these bikes delivered, or manufactured and delivered rather, to your door. Moving on to the question of, is it worth the money? Out the door, the price tag on this bike is roughly $21,000, depending on your state tax. Now, every state is going to vary on their tax percentage, but with Texas state tax, registration, everything else, this bike was $21,000 out the door. On top of that, I added about $1,000 worth of modifications. So these Rizoma stealth mirrors were 500 bucks alone. The tail tidy was 300. I also added these, well, I didn't, the dealership did, but I paid for them, these radiator guards. So we're looking at about $1,000 worth of upgrades, we'll call them, to the bike. This bike, as it sits with title, tax, and everything, is about $22,000. Insurance for somebody like me, 24, and only 7 years of driving history, which you'd think would be enough, is about $3,500 a year. So out the door for at least 1 year of Panigale ownership, you're looking at about 24,000, 25,000 bucks, depending on your insurance situation. But to me, it is 100% worth it. It's something that I've wanted for a long time. I've had 4 bikes before this, and I wouldn't trade this bike for any one of them, or any other bike for that matter. Even the V4 might be a little bit too much bike for me. I've never ridden one, but this just fits me. Something about how simple it is. These fairings are just, you don't have any cutouts in them, any sharp edges, no canards or, wings on it or anything. I just think there's something beautiful about how simple it is, which is why I chose the V2. I could have more than easily afforded a V4, but I think that this is the bike I'm going to be able to get 100% of use out of. So that's why I went ahead and went with it. And I know it's only been 200 miles in a couple weeks, but I've purchased expensive things before and had buyer's remorse almost immediately. And something like this, I still feel as good about it now, the same way I did before I bought it. So buyer's remorse, I don't think you'll get that. It's beautiful enough to look at that you will not have to worry about regretting it. I don't know who could regret buying something this beautiful. So moving on to, is it too powerful? Now, right now, I have it in street mode, and there are a few different ways you can configure your modes. Street mode for me right now, at least for break-in or half of break-in and the ride home from the dealership and everything, I've had it set to the lowest possible power settings. I'm unsure of exactly how much horsepower you're getting. Stock from the factory to the wheel, you're getting about 130 plus or minus some, and to the crank, you're getting 155. Right now, in the street mode that I have configured at the lowest power setting, I'd say you're probably getting plus or minus 100 horsepower. It's tough to say. I don't have access to a dyno, but given that you have different modes, I would say this bike might be too powerful for a beginner per se, but if you have a little bit of experience on 2 wheels, whether it's a dirt bike or a street bike, a dual sport, whatever it may be, I think that it's manageable. It's definitely manageable. For reference, I have ridden this bike for about 3 years now, and I haven't ridden a street bike in 4 or 5. So I went from this bike straight to the Ducati dealership to pick up this one. And I jumped on it, didn't have any issues, haven't stalled it, haven't over revved it. There are just so many safety features on a bike like this that I would actually venture to say it's safer to move up to a bike like this as your second or third bike than it is something like this, given that it has little to no safety features. So the question of, is it too powerful? For a first bike, I would say definitely. If not too powerful for a first bike, I would say it's definitely too expensive for a first bike. Your first bike is something that you are 100% going to drop. This is something that I've told multiple people, and I'm like, hey, don't go out and buy your dream bike for your first bike, because you're definitely going to drop it at least once or twice, whether you're doing low speed maneuvers in a parking lot, whether you're parking it in your garage, you forget to put your kickstand down, whatever it may be, you're gonna drop it once or twice. So save your dream bike for your second or third bike. That way you can, put the miles and clutch wear and drops on a bike like this that's much cheaper than a V2, instead of something that you want to park in your living room and look at. So that is my answer to the question of whether or not it's too powerful. Now moving on to the question of whether or not this bike is comfortable. For reference, I am 6'3". I fit on this bike much better than I thought I would. So street bikes in general, it's something that you go to the showroom floor, you sit on it, and it feels pretty unnatural. If I were to leave it only up to the feel of the dealership, I would say this bike is not for me, but I kind of know how street bikes work a little bit with the position. There's something about having the inertia of moving in an actual direction that makes the bike pretty comfortable. So I have sat on this bike. The longest ride I've done without getting off of this thing was about 1 hour and 45 minutes, as I said in my last video, and my back wasn't hurting. I may have, leaned back and cracked it, but it was nothing uncomfortable. I think that the seating position is aggressive compared to something like a dual sport or a cruiser, of course, but as far as sport bikes are concerned, I've ridden an R6. That bike is much more uncomfortable than this bike, in my opinion. I'm not sure what it is about it. There's something about having my foot in the resting position right here on the foot peg that kind of makes it uncomfortable, so I tend to put my toes on the foot peg instead of having it in the ready position right above the rear brake. That is pretty much the one part of my body that does get sore when I ride this bike, so I tend to resort to this alternate position of just resting my toes on the foot peg. As far as the clutch is concerned, up and down, I'm perfectly fine with. My left foot has never been sore, and I keep it in the position it's supposed to be, whether I'm ready to upshift or downshift. I have never had any issues with my left foot. As far as the seat is concerned, this is a very comfortable sports seat. I've sat on a few different bikes and I've ridden a few different bikes. I would venture to say that the Panigale V2 seat is much more comfortable than this dual sport seat, although the seating position is much more different. A seating position on a bike like this is closer to a bicycle, but this is a much narrower seat, and even though it's a softer material, you don't have as much surface area to spread your butt out on. So I would go ahead and pick the V2 for longer rides, definitely, because I've been on that bike for 40, 50 miles, and I just have to get off and stretch out a little bit because the seat does make you a little sore, but this bike is pretty comfortable given all of the factors. Now moving on to the question of, does this bike run hot? I would say that nominal running temperature for this bike is between about 180 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. It can get a little hotter, can get a little warmer, but if you're staying moving, that is about where the temperature sits. This exhaust does sit right under the seat, so it does tend to make things a little warm, but I would say it's nothing that you can't manage. Right now in Texas, it's only between 60 to 75 November in Texas, but it's nothing I've had an issue with. I think that when summer comes around, I'll feel the same about it because, when it's 110, 115 outside, you're not gonna, this seat couldn't make any difference. That's kind of how I feel about things. I do like heat, so I am a little biased in that direction. But long story short, I would not let the hot seat keep you from buying this bike. Everything has compromises. If you buy the most trackable Ferrari, it's not gonna have door handles. So everything has a little compromise. For me, a little bit of a warm seat, not a terrible thing. It's cold in most places in the US for most of the year, so it's not an issue, unless you live near the equator. Does the stock exhaust sound good? I have seen many videos. I think it's hard to capture how this exhaust sounds through a camera. So I've ridden this bike, I've caught first, I've downshifted, I've done cold starts, warm starts, you name it. And I think the exhaust is here to stay. I've had many different sport bikes, and as far as stock exhaust is concerned, this is definitely one of the better ones. Now, if you know anything about Ducati, you'll know that they don't call their exhaust systems. It's more of a race silencer, a track silencer, or what have you. It definitely feels like this is a bit of a silencer, less so than an exhaust system. So something like this CRF, you take the exhaust off this and it sounds like a Harley. That is a muffler, a spark arrestor, a silencer, an emissions device, you name it. When you start up a bike like this, it sounds like they tried to keep it as true to its original form as possible while still meeting all the federal BS that you have to meet as an auto manufacturer. I definitely think this exhaust is here to stay, especially for the price of aftermarket exhaust, which can range anywhere from $2,000 to $7,000 for this bike. Now, given that it's a $20,000 bike, which is expensive, I don't think it's worth spending 30 to 40% on an exhaust system, especially when it sounds pretty decent for what it is. Now, I did a cold start in my last video, but I might go ahead and hit you guys with another one just so you can see what this bike sounds like cold. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and give this bike a cold start. Hasn't been started up in a few days, so it's definitely a cold start. I'll let it run for a few seconds, idle, and I'll give it a couple revs just so you can hear what it sounds like. Now, it might be a little hard to tell just how bassy that exhaust was through this GoPro, but I am going to take this bike on a ride in a few days when it's warmer. I'll put a POV view on the GoPro and hopefully that'll capture some of the sound of catching first, running through gears, being in RPM, being under load, all that good stuff. But just running idle, this bike sounds amazing. I don't think y'all will be disappointed in your purchase if you purchase this bike. Now the final question, one that was pretty important to me because as much as I like my machines, I don't like to attract negative attention. There are a few reasons for this. Bikes that attract a lot of attention are more prone to theft, vandalism, people sitting on it to take Instagram pictures, you name it. Now, this bike does seem to attract an unhealthy level of attention. The reason I say that, I picked it up from the dealership. Not even 2 minutes of me warming this bike up, I was talking to my brother who was driving my car. I was like, hey, let's hook up to our cardos and let's, this is the route we're gonna take home. In that 2 minutes, I turn around, there's an old guy walking around the bike and he's flicking the body panels, flicking the fairings, trying to figure out what the material is. And I was walking up to him, I said, hey guy, what the hell are you doing? What are you doing? He's like, it's all plastic. I was like, hey, dude, I had to move his hand, take his hand off the bike because he kept touching it and flicking it, trying to figure out what it was made of. I was like, dude, you shouldn't touch other people's things. And he went for another flick. I grabbed his little mitten and I said, stop touching my bike, dude. He goes, I didn't know it was so delicate. I'm like, hey guy, it's my dream bike. You shouldn't be touching people's stuff like that. At the same time, I had some guy with his little Frappuccino standing around watching me take delivery of the bike, watching the dealer go over all the features with me, watching me gear up, watching me cold start it. He watched every step of the delivery process. Even though they had $110,000 bikes on the showroom floor, I was his number one concern. I've also noticed that on the road, people tend to look at you, break their necks. People on the sidewalk, they, make a full 180 to look at the bike. People at gas stations want to talk about it. Hey, is that a Ducati? And I'm all for, questions, but when it says Ducati right there on the gas tank, that does get a little annoying. Now, like I said before, I don't take this bike to work. I don't take it to the grocery store. I also don't take it to run errands. It's more of a weekend toy, go around trip somewhere, never leave it parked anywhere. So that doesn't seem to be too much of a problem for me. If you're planning on taking this bike to work, taking this bike to school, I would say get something a little less noticeable, something a little cheaper, something you're a little more willing to lose if you have to lose it, because this is a bike that attracts a lot of attention, unfortunately. People are going to want to ask questions about it. People are going to want to take pictures with it. People are going to want to steal it. Now, in terms of theft, there are some steps you can take. I may or may not have taken some of those. I don't feel like discussing that, but there are some steps you can take to mitigate the chances that this bike gets stolen, but it is going to cost you an extra $500 to $1,000 if you're going to be parking it anywhere outside of a garage. Now, I have a camera on this. I have cameras outside. I have a security system, so it's not an issue for me to leave this bike in here, but it's something that if you were going to park it outside of you're gonna bring it to someone's house, you're gonna bring it to a party, a, grocery store, run errands with it, I definitely would not wanna leave it out there. You're gonna be thinking about it the whole time. Is my Panigale okay? Is my Panigale okay? Oh my God, I wish I could see my Panigale. Now, hopefully that answers some of the pressing questions for you guys. If you have any more, please just drop them in the comment section. I do check it regularly. I'll make sure to get to your questions. If there's anything I don't know off the top of my head, I'll either write it to figure out the answer to your question, or I will check the owner's manual. But in terms of everything so far, I love the bike. It was a great purchase. No buyer's remorse whatsoever. If I had to buy it again, I would do it 10 more times. It's a fantastic bike. I don't think you'll regret your decision. Just make sure you get proper insurance on it, because you don't want to be taking a $23,000 loss. Make sure you park it in a place where it's safe, all that good stuff. If you guys have any more questions, drop them in the comment section. I'll be happy to answer them. And thanks for checking out today's video.